Hello everyone, my name is Casper. In this video I am going to briefly go over the astrology chart of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was born October 15th, 1844 at 10 a.m. in the city of, I don't know how to say it, but it was a city in Germany. I don't know, I just typed in the information. On Astrology, his chart time got a rotten rating of B, so we don't know his exact birth time, but we do know his birth date. So the chart isn't perfect. It's not the most accurate, but at least we know where the planets are in the signs. So let's just jump into it, because Nietzsche's chart is very interesting and very exciting, because I recently did the astrology of Schopenhauer, and it was interesting because Schopenhauer had his sun conjunct Saturn and Pisces, and we kind of saw in Schopenhauer's philosophy a kind of withdrawing or turning one's back on life in a very almost spiritual and Christian way, which is very Saturnian and Piscean. But with Nietzsche, we get something completely different, because his sun is in Libra opposite Pluto, and both of these planets are exactly at 22 degrees. And this is incredibly fascinating, because 22 degrees in astrology is the degree of kill or be killed. It's a very dramatic, intense degree. It doesn't necessarily mean that people who have planets at 22 degrees are going to kill or be killed, but it's certainly a lot of characters who have planets at 22 degrees are interesting. Like they're characters. For example, Napoleon had his sun at 22 degrees in Leo, and that makes a lot of sense, because he crowned himself as emperor, and Leo is about being the king. Donald Trump has his sun at 22 degrees of Gemini. Andrew Tate has his sun at 22 degrees of Sagittarius. So we see, I don't know why, I think I just look at the charts of a lot of powerful people, but it is interesting how, like, the people that pop out tend to be, you know, anyway. So Nietzsche is one of these people who has his sun at 22 degrees. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because Nietzsche's philosophy is kind of like this will to power, and it's about this selfish will to power and this dominance and competition, where it built off of Schopenhauer, where there's just this will, and this will is something we should be pessimistic about, so we should turn away from it. While with Nietzsche, we get this sense of moving into it, like, let's go, let's see who can be the best, who can be the strongest, let's fight to the death, which to me very much reflects the sun opposite Pluto at 22 degrees. Because if your sun represents your ego and who you are, Pluto represents death, destruction, transformation, regeneration. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, it's so amazing how the philosophy of Nietzsche is very sun Pluto, because if Pluto represents regeneration and rebirth and growth, and Nietzsche says what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I mean, it's just amazing how it parallels so perfectly. He lost his father when he was like 11 years old or something, and so in a very direct form, in a very blunt way, that sun Pluto can be manifested is the loss of a father. And it had a huge impact on Nietzsche, of course. Another really interesting thing about Nietzsche's philosophy is that he talked about this idea of resentment. And it's interesting because the Libra sign, right, which is, Nietzsche's star sign is Libra. Libra is a very balanced sign, diplomatic, sophisticated. It's an air sign. So it's pretty intelligent, but also Librans, they tend to see two sides of every issue. Librans, right, they're very, in a sense, they're dualistic, but in the sense of people. They see two sides of every issue. They see the winners and the losers. They see right? They just see two sides to everything. And it's interesting because in Nietzsche's philosophy, we do see that two-sided sense. And he pointed out this resentment that one side had because of the other. So if Libra is the sign of two sides and being diplomatic and being fair, Aries is the opposite of that. Aries is very selfish. It's all about me. I'm the winner. Aries is also a sign of being heroic and being the best. So in Nietzsche's philosophy, we can see where he sees like two sides of every issue, and then he also sees this like power, dominance, being the best. And so I believe because this is a Nietzsche's chart, I think that this would be also part of his own psychology. I think Nietzsche himself dealt a lot with resentment and the sense of being passive aggressive and not speaking your truth and not being honest and being direct, because there's this Pluto in Aries that's just forcing him, like, you need to be honest, right? You need to achieve your will to power. But then he has the sun in Libra that wants to be fair and wants to be nice and diplomatic. And so I think Nietzsche really understands like this dynamic of how there's two sides to every issue, and both of these sides needs to kind of duke it out. They need to fight for their will to power. That Pluto in Aries, which is about being a hero and about being the best. So I think that's very interesting. Another thing about Nietzsche is that he suffered a lot of health issues. He would go through periods for a couple of weeks or days of being in crippling bad health, where he would vomit, he wouldn't be able to sleep, he would go through like these horrible moments, and then he'd come out of it renewed and refreshed. And this makes a lot of sense because he has Pluto and Uranus in his sixth house, and the sixth house is the house of health, right? So if Pluto is the aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy where it's about rebirth and renewal and being a new man and having a gratitude for what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, the Uranus is the aspect of Nietzsche's health where it was like it was being thrown into complete like unhealthiness and then coming out being healthy, right? Because Uranus is all about chaos and up and down. Uranus is the planet, again, it's the planet of chaos. It's the planet of crazy ups and downs, right? And so if it's in your sixth house, then it's going to be this huge health increase and then this sudden loss of health, and then suddenly regaining your health and suddenly losing it. And of course we see that all throughout Nietzsche's life until he sadly lost his mind from syphilis, I think. So I think that's so interesting how he has these planets in the sixth house which are negatively or having a huge influence on his health. And what's also interesting about Nietzsche is that a lot of people see Nietzsche as kind of like the hammer in philosophy, how he was very critical and very harsh with his language and just like he just says things. And it's interesting because he has Mars conjunct Mercury, and so if Mercury is your writing and communication, Mars is like your aggression and how you're aggressive. So his writing and speaking is very aggressive. It's very attacking. It's and I think it's very much influenced by Uranus, right? Because Uranus is this, right? Like I believe that when Nietzsche wrote his books, he could only write for brief periods of time because of his health, right? And you see this opposition. Nietzsche has a lot of opposing things going on inside of him. He couldn't write. In other words, he couldn't use his Mercury. He couldn't write or communicate unless it depended on his health in the sixth house. So if Uranus was really positive and letting him have his health, then he would have these brief periods of time where he could write down everything he needed to. And he would have to write quickly and very powerfully with this Mars as well, because Mars is channeling all of that energy and passion into his writing. So I also think that's very interesting. Right? You see like this very aggressive, like going through the pain, and then you see this sense of like feeling safe and feeling like you're coming out of the harshness and you're finally able to breathe. Like I really get that sense from Nietzsche, like pain and fighting, and then being relieved and having some time to recoup and to regenerate. Um, it's also interesting. Nietzsche has Neptune trine his sun. I think that when Nietzsche first started out in his life, he was very religious. He believed in God. He was a Christian. And then of course, Pluto again is all about death and destruction, and right, Pluto kind of shattered and smashed that belief that God is dead. Right, because that Neptune trine his sun gave him a very strong spiritual, like he can be a very spiritual person, but at the same time that Pluto is asking him to constantly break things down and to discover the new thing and to rebuild. um Another really interesting thing that I see in his chart is that he has Venus in Virgo conjunct Chiron. I think in one period of his life he fell in love with a woman who, I don't know her name, but he fell in love with her, but she rejected him, and that really hurt him, and that made him very sad. And that's interesting because Venus in Virgo, right? Venus in a man's chart represents the woman he falls in love with, or the woman that he loves, or the kinds of women he's attracted to, and also the kind of how he relates to women. And Virgo is this very cold, frigid sign. It's very critical. And so Venus in Virgo would say, oh, not very good with women, or struggles with women, or women tend to be critical or rejecting. And this is only reinforced because Chiron is conjunct Venus. And Chiron represents your wounds. It represents kind of like those 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 feelings that are never truly healed. And so I don't know, maybe the loss of, right, being rejected by the woman he fell in love with, that he fell in love with, that hurt him the most. Like that was the most painful thing. um I think he even, I don't know if he said this, maybe I heard this somewhere else, but I think he said that emotional pain hurt much more than physical pain. Like, I'm sure I heard it from somewhere else, but maybe Nietzsche even said that even with all of the physical pain he endured, emotional pain was felt much more painful. So, uh, anyway, um, going back to Mercury, which is Nietzsche's like, which represents Nietzsche's writing and communication. Uranus not only gave him certain brief periods to write and express his thoughts before his health would be thrown back into chaos, but you could also say that Uranus made his writing more sporadic and erratic and more crazy and more rebellious, like gave him a rebellious streak. I think what's also interesting is that Nietzsche has his moon conjunct Rahu, and the moon kind of represents your emotions, it represents your feelings, it represents who you are on a day-to-day life. And Rahu represents deception, it represents smoke. It also represents intensity and making someone very obsessive and very intense. Uh, basically, people who have moon conjunct Rahu, they can kind of go crazy. They end up losing their minds in the end because, I mean, this isn't always the case, but these people, right, especially in Vedic astrology and Rahu, right, this is where the true meaning of Rahu comes from. It comes from Vedic astrology. But people who say, right, a lot of Vedic astrologers say that people who have moon conjunct Rahu, they tend to be dark, or they tend to lose their minds, or their minds are poisoned in the sense that they're getting a lot of negative influences, or they're being like demons are talking to them. And in Nietzsche's life, he not only lost his mind from syphilis, of course, but uh, he also, people suspect it was syphilis, but he did lose his mind in the end, which is unfortunate and tragic and very sad because Nietzsche was a genius, and who knows what he would have written if he would have survived that much longer. I mean, it could have been amazing, but also he was egotistical and very much lost in his own world, and he was, he was in solitude a lot. He walked by himself a lot. He went on these walks and he was by himself, and uh, I think that very much captures the moon conjunct Rahu aspect, where someone kind of loses their minds and they're very obsessive and egotistical and lost in their own mind and their own head, because these people's emotions, their minds get the best of them. Their minds take over who they are. And then I think this is interesting, or just the last detail I want to talk about is that he has a Scorpio ascendant. Now, his birth time could be off because it has a Rodin rating of B, but Scorpio ascendants are often stereotypically seen as psychologists, people who look behind the scenes, people who are able to see things beneath. And so it is interesting because the ascendant is kind of like the mask that people wear, kind of like who they are on a day-to-day basis. And so Nietzsche is kind of like this Scorpio. He sees behind everything. He sees the truth behind everything. He's kind of like a psychologist. I think that's everything with his chart. That's the most fascinating thing. Again, that sun opposite Pluto very much captures the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy and his personality. This sense of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This will to power. Pluto is all about those themes. Nietzsche's philosophy is incredibly Plutonian, and I think it's so cool how you can see that in his chart, and it restores my faith in astrology.